Hello, everybody. It's James here, WSI, and it is part two with Kevin Sullivan. He'll forgive me because I didn't write an introduction different from the first one, so I thought I'd best just launch into the show. And just beforehand, we were talking about all the wonderful holidays we've had in Europe as well. And you're sort of like I don't know, like Anglophile, but like the European version of an Anglophile. But you sure do love, a Europhile, let's say. You're
Yeah.
you're a big fan. How many countries in Europe have you been?
Well, I've been into England, Ireland, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, uh, Italy, Sicily, France, Belgium. I'm probably forgetting a few, but I, I, and I didn't go for work. You know what I mean? I went to enjoy it, see the country, love it. Oh, Spain! I miss Spain. We were talking about it for a half hour.
Yeah.
Spain's one of my favorite countries. I had dear friends. He just passed away, and he was an English gentleman that was a tax exile that lived in Spain. So we go over to Spain a couple of times a year for about a decade. Yeah.
I had a follow up question. Actually, I've got an app on the phone, right, and it's called Bean, Been, and it's just a globe, and you just check off every country you've been to, and then it gives you a percentage of what continent. You should get that. And
I'll try. Yeah.
I I wrote a billion questions as a no. I told you last time, and most of these more revolve around WCW and more booking, and that's where I really find the sort of the most interest where these stories are concerned is the thought process of some of the stories that come to fruition on TV. And I didn't write a million down, but I wrote a few. And going into WCW straight away, and Eric Bischoff. I believe there's like two different sides of the story as far as how Eric Bischoff got the job. How do you think Eric got the executive VP job?
I've heard a bunch of stories like you have, right? I heard about Jason Hervey, the letter, and all that. But my personal belief is WCW was in such disarray that they didn't know who they were going to take. They had Bill Watts, Ole. They bought out Jimmy Crockett. That Eric presented himself, and rightfully so, as a businessman, not a wrestler. And I think it was the right decision for the company because Eric, when he first came, was very open to listen to everybody's ideas. And Eric had this thing where he thought out of the box too, because when I talk to people about booking, one of the things I bring up that Eddie Graham instilled upon his book is do not fall into patterns. And we all do. Whether we get up in the morning and the first thing is we brush our teeth. You know what I mean? That's the first thing, or we blow our nose, whatever. And Eric hadn't been indoctrinated long enough to fall into those patterns. So I think he presented himself as a businessman first that knew the wrestling, not a wrestler that didn't know business. So I think that's why he got the job.
What did, because I know there's the famous story of Bill Watts taking a whiz out of the window, and I know he made some rather distasteful comments as well in an interview a couple of years earlier that ended up getting resurfaced. But why did the Turner Brass have such a bad taste in the mouth with Bill Watts?
You'd have to know Bill. I got along with Bill, but Bill, and he was a student of Eddie Graham. Mm. Bill was a bully, plain and simple, and when he thought he was above anybody's reproach. And I've heard that story about pissing off the balcony. To me, if Watts was a very smart guy, he wanted to do that to get out, to get fired or whatever, because he knew he'd still get his contract paid. Somehow, when he went there, maybe he saw that he wasn't going to get the complete authority that thought he deserved. And he said, I got to get out of here. And I don't think Billy was that stupid to not know what the consequences were going to be.
Going back to Eric again, you said that he did, some pretty revolutionary things as VP, or I don't think he was executive vice president, but he would eventually become that. It's essentially the same job. But what were some of the fresh thinking ideas that Eric brought to the table as far as maybe saving money or creative?
Well, Eric realized with a lot, which none of the other guys from Kip Fry to the numerous guys that were there before him, Jim Hurd, that talent is the number one priority in this business. It's a talent-driven business. And he saw that. And, there's always been these different rumors about how they end up, we always started. He went to Japan and saw that. And then I was with Eric when we brokered the deal for Japan. And that was the first time the Japanese had ever worked closely with any other office. Back in the day, they would send like Baba came over, went around the States. It was a big draw with in LA and Hawaii, and for Vince Sr. Then Inoki came over. But when we did the deal with New Japan, they were paying us $1 million a year to use their talent on TV. They paid for the flights back and forth, and they paid the guy's salary. Nothing came out of our kick. But when our guys went over there, they got their salary plus the Japanese salaries. So, and that took a while because you know Japanese business, you have meetings to have meetings. And Eric, I don't think anybody else would have had the wherewithal to stay into that kind of business because, they turn on, they think they're the king of the hill. Eric was smart enough to understand international business.
With Eric, he's always said that he never ever said to anybody that his goal was to run the WWF out of business. So how many times did he personally tell you that he wanted to see the WWF out of business?
Well, he didn't tell me personally, but we knew that that's what the goal was. They came close. They came very close. I heard rumors where they took the bottled water out of the WWF, offices. I don't believe that. But when we were on that roll, and people forget this, our ratings were beating or getting the exact same ratings or very close when Nitro started. We beat them the first quarter ever on TV. And I used Japanese talent there too, the first Nitro, Pillman and Justin Dandalaga. Then I had Sabu and different people because I was trying to reach out to the pockets of the Japanese fans, the ECW fans, and then later on, I was in Denver one night for a show, and I'm looking in the audience, I see all these Mexican flags. In Denver, I had no idea, Denver being the northwest part of the southwest. I got in touch with Conan, who I knew. He brought the Hispanic luchadors in, and we were giving them a completely different product. Vince was selling, my thought process was, we're selling vehicles. Vince is selling Cadillacs. We're going to sell Harley Davidsons. A little bit more grittier product. And that's how we got the jump on him. And Eric, getting back, that's a long way about the story. Did Eric? Yeah, everybody wanted they thought they wanted the WWE to go out of business. The worst thing it would be, no competition. But I don't think, it took the scandal to drive Vince, if he's completely out of the business, but he's a very smart guy, But Eric came very close.
I may bring up Vince in a later question, but one of the things, obviously, Eric's famous for doing soon after he gets into power is bringing in a lot of ex-WWF employees. And now, I'm sure we'll bring up Hulk Hogan quite soon, but I've got to ask about who you once termed as the lecherous old bastard, Mean Gene Okerlund.
One of the sweethearts of the wrestling business. I mean, I've never heard anybody talk bad about Gene. And he I want to word this completely right. Even though he would stay straight on those interviews, there was a twinkle in his eye that he was letting you in on the inside joke. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like, okay. And he'd always have this outline. I remember when I was watching them one time, when Bundy squashed Hogan, remember that?
Yeah.
He kept the splashes and splashed Hogan. And Mean Gene's closing line was, "The world will not sleep tonight, not knowing how hurt the immortal Hulk Hogan is." And it was like, he had that look, and I thought, wow, this guy is so good. So good.
I remember once that he tried to claim, of all the sporting events that he had covered throughout the years, I've covered the 1968 and 1972 Olympics. And I was like, no, you didn't. Or maybe for your local radio station you did. You never covered the Olympics.
Yeah. Did his son play in the Olympics?
Was he like a hockey player? Oh, there you go.
Yeah. I think he played in the Olympics, didn't he?
I can look that up, actually. Well, I'll look it up afterwards. But yeah, I've got a feeling he was a high-end hockey player, yeah.
Yeah, because he ended up being a pro hockey player.
Yeah. Do you remember how much trouble the 1-900-909-9900, the line and some of the stories Gene said got you guys in trouble?
I think that Gene was a loose cannon on his own right because he was trying to drive the ratings up, right? To bring in more cash, and Gene had a part of that, percentage of that. I don't think Gene thought anybody was overseeing him at all. You know what I mean? Because I'd listen to it too, and I'd raise my eyebrows and say, whoa. So I think, because there was a point where the only time the North Tower would look at us if something dastardly happened, an inside lawsuit or something else. Other than that, we were like looked upon as second-class citizens.
I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. I seem to remember there's like an issue with Ricky Steamboat, and I don't know if he was returning or Gene claimed he was returning, or something to that effect. But I've got a feeling that Ricky Steamboat ended up doing a lawsuit or something to that effect.
I think you're right. I think it was they were saying coming soon and alluding that it was Ricky. And I remember something about that. Yeah, I mean, because they were at each other, the lawyers on both sides, looking for the slightest proclamation to, cause a rift in a lawsuit. It was a battlefield for a while.
Do you know what, right? I've not written this down, but now you mention lawsuits, it's a good enough question to ask is, I know you're in depositions, especially over the Hall and Nash thing that lasted for years, but I mean, how many lawsuits or how many frivolous lawsuits were there going back and forth between WCW and WWF?
It was constant. The one lawsuit you mentioned about me being deposed by McDevitt, first thing was they got on me about Razor. They said, it's the same character. And I said, no, it's not the same character. His name is Scott Hall. And I don't want a stereotype of a Hispanic drug dealer on my program. And I kept on saying Scott Hall, and we were arguing back and forth, and he was debating back and forth. And he was saying, no, it's Razor Ramon. And about 8 minutes into the conversation, Jerry said, Scott Hall. And I waited till he finished his thought process, and I said, see, even you watching it said it's Scott Hall. He said, I never said Scott Hall. And I asked the girl that was taking the deposition.
Stenographer.
To read it back. He said, let's take a break now. Let's take a bathroom break. So we went in, and I went in the bathroom. He said, oh, Kevin, how you doing? I said, good. He said, oh, great. He said, can you catch a plane home? I said, yeah. He said, there's one in about an hour. He said, okay. He went in. He said, Mr. Sullivan could be excused. So
I've seen video footage of that where like Kevin Nash, I think it's Kevin Nash, keep doing the hand sign just to amuse themselves, through the whole process. Do you remember who actually won that lawsuit in the end?
You know something? As much as I want to think that we won, we didn't. They won in the end. You know what I mean? Because the likeness and the closeness of it and the whole thing. But I mean, if we lost, it was no big deal because they had revolutionized wrestling. And I don't think we'll ever see that angle again because, Chris.
One sec. So, sorry, we had a slight interruption. So, what you just said was we don't think we'll ever see an angle like that again because
everybody knows that people are under contracts now, and because of the internet. When we were doing this, the internet was in its infancy, and the thing was, they came, and everybody did think it was New York against us. Even the guys. I mean, it was crazy. I believe in heat. So I was dumping all the heat on them, and we would be doing interviews, and the baby faces would come up to me and say, they're working for New York. That's why. Chris.
Sorry about that. Another call. I had a joke, and I can't even think of the joke now. So anyway, carry on, Kevin. So the baby faces were coming up to you.
Yeah, and they were saying, they're working for Vince. You can't be dumping this heat on them. They're killing us. Chris, excuse me, James. Is this this was not what I saw him.
Sorry about that. We're having a right old pile of disasters with the Zoom. So yes, carry on, Kevin.
So all the baby faces were thinking they're getting killed, you know what I mean? Because we were dumping all kinds of heat on them. And rightfully so, because in the back of my mind, right from the beginning, where they thought, for this to really go sky high, National Hall were the best two, I believe, to come in. I knew by that time, Hogan's popularity was starting to wane as a babyface. He was getting booed in arenas. There was the infamous one in Chicago where he came dressed all in black headband, black cross, black shirt, black pants. And they booed him out of the building. And Gene said, you can tell the solemn mood here tonight. And that was what Gene could do. He could save things. And I said, boy, he's got to turn. And I said, if he turns, it will revive him. And history proved that was the way to go.
Yeah, with Hogan, actually, I'm going to bring him up now. And something that I've never quite figured out is that Hulk Hogan, and I bet a lot of people won't know this, is they probably thought that Hulk Hogan the first time, or one of the first times he appeared on WCW TV, was in that Disney parade and he's waving and kissing babies and shaking hands and all that kind of thing. But he was appearing on WCW TV from like January, so about 6 months beforehand. How come it took him so long to migrate from, Thunder in Paradise on-set interviews to actually being a part of the WCW locker room?
The negotiation process, which I wasn't privy to, but I'm going to put my thinking cap on and assume this and see if this makes sense to you, James. A lot of people don't realize Hogan didn't have a WCW contract. He had a personal service contract with Ted Turner. And I think that took a while to get it hammered out because Ted was such a busy guy. And what this was, I believe, Henry Holmes was Hogan's lawyer. They wanted a face-to-face meeting with Ted more than once to make sure their T's were crossed, their I's were dotted. And that's what was taking it so long. I believe, I may be completely off the mark here, but I don't know anybody else, and I'm probably not right, but I don't think anybody else, with maybe the exception of Goldberg later on, had a personal service contract. Everybody else had contracts with WCW.
Now, I know that Alex Wright had a contract with Turner Broadcasting rather than WCW. So I believe there was like DDP did because he bought his contract was bought out by the WWF for like 50 cents on the dollar because he wanted to be part of the invasion. I believe Goldberg did. I believe Bret Hart did. I think quite a lot of people had Turner contracts with Turner rather than WCW.
It was Turner, but not a personal service contract with Ted Turner. Completely different contract.
Right. What is the difference then?
The personal service, and I'm no lawyer, but a personal service contract is you're contracted not to that company, but to Ted Turner himself. So if anything went south or bankruptcy or whatever, Ted wasn't going to go bankrupt. So you knew you were going to get the money. And with Alex Wright, I think the reason why Alex got it was Alex was, and I think Alex Wright was, and it's probably part of my fault too, definitely underused. But at the time, he was so young with all these grizzled veterans, and we're more based in reality, but we should have done something more with Alex. That he was brought over because he had the connection with the German television through a local promoter. And I don't know how that went down, but I went to Germany and met with the local promoter a couple of times. And I think he had the rights to Alex deal with the TV in Germany. So we were on a very strong channel in Germany because of Alex.
With Alex, because I interviewed him recently as well, and he was so disappointed that the Berlin character, which was, Eric Bischoff was a big fan of the Berlin character, and then when Vince Russo came in, Alex is not a fan of Vince Russo, and Vince Russo apparently wasn't a fan of Alex, and the character went away pretty soon. But that had a lot of potential.
Oh, you know whose idea that was?
No.
Dusty Rhodes.
Really?
You know, Dusty gets knocked a lot by people that didn't know him. Dusty was a brilliant guy, could think out of the box. I was a little hesitant when I first saw, you remember the vignette with the marching soldiers?
Do you know, I don't recall that. I remember in wrestling, but I don't remember the vignettes.
Yeah, they had a vignette with, if it wasn't, it appeared to be Nazi soldiers marching in the streets. And I thought, whoa, we may get some flack from this, but we didn't. And Dusty, one of the things that Dusty was great at was producing a guy through vignettes. Dusty wanted to be Steven Spielberg.
You never quite achieved that, though. But I mean, so few people, get the are allowed to sort of like flex their creative freedom for as long as Dusty had. So he must have been pretty creatively fulfilled over the years.
Right. But I'm sorry that Alex, the Berlin thing was cut, because he tried very hard. That's one of the things I always mention, that second generation kids, his father was a great wrestler. Second generation kids, somehow, most of them, by osmosis of being around the business, taken into the dressing room when they're babies, they seem to pick it up a little quicker. And I think Alex would have been a breakout star and a breakout heel. Much like Gunther, is that his name?
It was Walter, wasn't it? So yeah, I think Gunther.
Sorry, that staunch German face. Alex would have been a huge star, and I'm sorry that happened to him, and I'm glad it didn't happen to him with my watch.
Yeah, we'll move on, and obviously, I've heard you talk about this before, so I'll run through it quickly. The Dungeon of Doom was an idea to basically just feed a load of monsters to Hulk Hogan, get him comfortable with you as a booker, get him comfortable in a role that he was used to for many, many years. And some members were better than others, but I mean, with the Dungeon of Doom, if you're going to have like a really sort of like successful trio of monster heels, who would you have picked who was available at the time?
Let me give you a backstory first.
Okay.
The reason why the dungeon was created was to make Hogan feel comfortable, and also to try to lump them into one segment. That, okay, some people, it's funny, as time goes by, it was not my brightest moment in the sun. But as time goes by, I have people come up and tell me, I love the dungeon. I still cringe when they say it. But if I had Ming and Barb and maybe Paul Orndorff.
Really?
Because Paul was one of the greatest heels of all times. And the thing would be, you have Ming and Barb, and Paul would be, what's wrong with this picture? I'm a big believer, one of those, what's wrong with this picture? Because one of my favorite times I've ever had in the faction I had was when I had the Varsity Club. Mm-hmm. I have these amateur champions around a lunatic with a black robe. What's wrong with that picture? Well, at that time, I try to keep on the current events. At that time, there was all kinds of scandals in college, and I said, well, I could play into this. And Dusty, that was Dusty's idea too. So I would love to have seen Bob and Ming and Paul together.
That was a great answer. Going back to Hulk Hogan briefly, and can you think of a particular time, maybe in the Dungeon of Doom era or whatever it was, where Hulk Hogan stroked his mustache, looked at you and said, that doesn't work for me, brother?
A lot of times, I mean, and I think I've never said this before, but I'm gonna tell you what I believe. When Hulk came over from Thunder in Paradise, he was not the Hulk Hogan from New York. He had trimmed way down. He was really skinny. And I think he lost his confidence because when he was he was hurt. When he was doing the interviews, he was hunched over. He wasn't that giant that he once was. And I think he might have known that. And he wanted to protect his persona so much that it reflected on the program itself, the complete program. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a kid, I started watching in the early 90s, and then I'd get tapes from a few years beforehand. And I remember the difference between WrestleMania 8 in 92 and when he returned at WrestleMania 9 in 93. That was the one in Las Vegas. And even me as a really young kid, I knew something had changed. And Hulk Hogan didn't have the aura that he did. And then when he goes to WCW, I mean, what, 50, 60, 70 pounds trimmer? That was for the movies, though, wasn't it? Did they tell him to drop weight?
I think they did because, the only one that seems to get bigger and bigger every movie is The Rock.
Yeah.
And I think they might have told Hogan that. But the other thing was, I've been on a couple of movie sets, and, I was on Baywatch with him a couple of times, and it's a grueling schedule. It wasn't that he got up when he wanted to and went to the gym and that kind of thing. And I'm going to tell you a story where I really noticed it. The famous or infamous finger poke of doom?
Yeah, I do.
That Kevin Nash has been taking shit for all these years.
Mm-hmm.
You do realize Kevin Nash was in the military, right?
Yeah, he was an MP, wasn't he?
Yeah, and you realize when you're in the military, you don't surrender or give up, and you take orders.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to the opening when they're standing side by side. If you were a betting man and didn't know who they were, who would you bet on if it was going to have a wrestling match?
Kevin Nash was a good 6 inches bigger at least, and yeah, probably.
And his arms were much bigger, and he had that long flowing hair. And how do you get out of that without having a match that you figure is going to make you look bad? You go to a guy that's a soldier, he's a corporal and you're the general, and you come up with that and you keep your mouth shut all these years. Kevin's a good soldier.
Yeah. I remember with Hulk Hogan and the Giant coming in, and I remember those matches probably a bit after the fact when I started looking at the archives. I remember thinking, man, Giant's really, really game for like bouncing around for Hulk Hogan all those years. Just as a kid, I just remember thinking that would never happen in a million years. And I didn't believe in Hulk Hogan could actually beat the Giant, even though I wasn't sure about what wrestling truly was. But something was always off with the Giant not just killing Hogan from the second they got in the ring for me.
Yeah, and again, it was one of those things where, because of Hogan's aura, a lot of people didn't see like you did. But if you're a real wrestling fan, you might not have known what you were seeing, but you saw something was off. Mm. And then when he got with the bigger guys, and I think that's why he wanted the monsters, because in his head, I think, and I mean, I'm no psychiatrist, that's for sure, even though I need one, he still perceived himself as that 320-pound, 6'8" giant himself. Because, it got to be a little bit where it was, wow, how much longer can we get away with this magic show?
And I suppose where it sort of ends up is of course uncensored. 96 with that 2-on-9 cage match where, of course, out of all the 9 bad guys who are in there, Ric Flair still takes the pinfall. With that being said, I wanted to actually bring up Brian Pillman at this point, because I believe that Brian Pillman was originally meant to be part of that match. Am I right there?
Yeah, he wanted to beat Brian Pillman right off the bat. You know what I mean? When he got all that heat. Brian Pillman not only did we lose a great talent, we lost a great mind. Brian Pillman would have been the greatest booker of all time, I think. Mm-hmm. He was just so innovative, thought out of the box. You've heard the story. Mark Madden says that he wanted to get the press pass and be on the show. Oh, well.
No, I don't know.
Okay, Brian Pillman, played for the Bengals. And when they were in the Super Bowl, he wanted to get on the sidelines. And they liked some of the former players to be on the sidelines. Brian Pillman, Terry Funk called me and said, "You're not going to believe what Pillman just told me." And he says, "Listen to this angle." Pillman wanted to, during the game, when the team started moving the other way, Pillman was going to bolt on the field, strip to his underwear, and chain himself and lock himself to the goalpost. I mean, he would have been arrested and everything, but look what would have happened. You know what I mean? He was just, and then the famous incident with him and Steve Austin with the gun. Mm-hmm. I mean, he thought really out of the box. Was it too much? I mean, what is too much? So.
How far in advance? And I'm assuming that everyone watching, or most people watching, will know the "I respect you, book a man" match, and then he walks out, that kind of thing. How many weeks or months beforehand did you realise that Brian Pillman was starting to brew up these out-of-the-box ideas to get himself noticed?
I knew Brian was very smart, and he was a hard worker and looked fantastic. And he started coming to me with these ideas and said, "What do you think?" I just listened truthfully. I mean, I like to take some credit for it, but I don't think I can. That was all Brian. That was all Brian's idea. And it turned out well for Brian, but the whole thing was, I don't think he really wanted to go to WWE at that time. I think he was trying to negotiate a Sting contract. And he was hoping he would get that big contract because he had a large family and wanted to take care of them. Yeah, but Brian was one of those guys that he watched all the matches. He had a lot of outside people that were smart to give him some psychology books about, Conan the Con Man. I guess there was a famous book that Brian read. And it was all Brian. He fed everybody those ideas. And if anybody wants to take credit for them, that they're full of shit.
Yeah.
It was Brian.
And just to sort of wrap up the question I asked beforehand, was it purely that Brian Pillman was just getting his popularity was ascending too quickly for Hulk Hogan not to take notice? And was this just insecurity for him to want to put an end to it?
It wasn't insecurity. He wanted to take the heat off of Brian because he thought he could draw with Brian. I mean, I personally think Brian did tell me this, that Hogan had told Eric that he wanted to work with him on a pay-per-view. Well, what was going to be the finish?
Well.
When you have creative control, I don't think Brian would have gone over Hulk at that.
I can't imagine too many rematches would be happening.
Yeah.
I am now going to move on. I'm going to give you another game, and I call it name association. So essentially, I'm going to give you a sentence, a descriptor, and you tell me the first name that pops into your head that you associate with that sentence, and you cannot say yourself. And the first thing I'm going to ask is funniest person in the locker room.
Brad Armstrong.
Everybody says Brian Armstrong. Why Brian Armstrong?
Brad, I said.
Oh, sorry, Brad Armstrong. Apologies. Everyone says Brad Armstrong.
So they're clones of one another. They're comedy. Very, very witty guys. The whole family's witty. Whole family. But Brad, as I mentioned before, if he could have taken the Brad Armstrong from the locker room and projected it on TV in interviews, he would have been a huge star. His work was so good. This is going to sound funny, James. His work was so smooth, I think it hurt him. It looked like he was dancing. Do you know what I mean? He looked like a professional ballet dancer. He was great.
Next one is last man standing at the bar.
Andre.
An easy one. The most beautiful woman wrestler / valet in real life.
Would be Trish Stratus, I think. I just saw her recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she's still got it going on, as they
yeah.
say. Yeah. Most bullied.
Most bullied. Maybe Disco.
Who was the bullier with Disco? Or was it just everyone?
Mostly the Steiners. And that's not a good person to get bullied from, especially Rick.
Do you know, you've just reminded me. I interviewed Curtis Hughes recently, and he said that like you were a fan of Curtis because I think like your son or someone was getting chased around by the Steiners, and Curtis stepped in and said leave him alone, and they left him alone after that.
Yeah. Curtis was. They drove. My son drove the Steiners crazy, and they repaid him in kind.
I will move on then. Smelliest wrestler.
Maybe Vader.
Name I've heard many times before. The biggest stooge for the dirt sheets.
Terry Taylor.
Really? What? Terry Taylor?
Yeah.
Or maybe I've heard it before. Yes, I think I've heard that one before. Most in trouble with the office while you were in WCW.
Most in trouble. Johnny Grunge.
Okay, I don't know why. Why Johnny?
Oh, one time they were in Orlando, and we used to be at the same hotel, and Johnny stole the van one night, the hotel's van. They wrecked it. He got arrested. They were at DUI. He was always, I love Johnny. I loved him. A great human being, but he was a kid. He was a 12-year-old boy till he died.
Most talented wrestler that was never given a chance.
Maybe Alex Wright or Adam Bomb.
Well, we talked about Alex Wright before, Adam Bomb particularly. I mean, do you know, as Wrath, before Kevin Nash beat him, man, that guy was really getting popular.
Yeah.
We'll move on to the next one. Nicest person in the business. Too nice, maybe.
Bobby Eaton.
I've heard that one many times before. Stiffest / most reckless.
Rick Steiner could be the stiffest when he wanted to be. The most reckless, I didn't have to work on because I was a heel, was Vader. I mean, the match with Flair and him, brutal.
Was that the retirement match in '93?
Yeah, that was brutal.
Yeah. Best enhancement talent to work with.
Yes. George South.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think, actually. So I've also written this. Also, the jobber who took the best ass-kicking from you particularly.
Downtown Denny Brown.
What did you do to him?
Oh, I did everything to Denny. You could bend him, but you couldn't break him. And he was the junior heavyweight champion of the world a couple of times.
Was he somebody who was like, yes, sir, can I have another?
Yeah, exactly. They have another, sir.
I've also got to ask this as well, is the double foot stomp that you used to do. I remember watching that as a kid and going, man, that really looks like it hurts. And then I think I've come to find out later that it looked so good because it really did hurt. Is that true?
Well, if you didn't tighten up, it would hurt. And now what I'm shocked about, they use that. I saw Finn Balor use it off the top rope the other night. Wow. You talk about being on time. You got to be at least. They've advanced it so much now. You know what I mean?
How did you? I mean, I suppose it's depending on the person you were wrestling, but if you wanted to protect the person that you were doing the big foot stomp to, I mean, was it timing of bending your knees at the right time? I mean, how would they take
that was exactly it. You'd have to bring your knees up, and when you came down, you couldn't come down full extension right before you hit their stomach. You had to be full extension before you hit the stomach.
Okay, let's have a look here. Most memorable thing you saw happen on an aeroplane?
Most memorable thing? Ric Flair. You shouldn't even bring this up, right? Got him all in trouble. Yeah, I've been there, seen it.
We know what you're saying. The worst storyline ever.
Maybe the Ding Dongs, huh?
That's more of a character thing. It's like an arcing
storyline. Worst storyline ever. There's been so many. Worst storyline ever. The dynamic dudes, trying them to be baby faces and send them into Philly.
We had that on the last one as well, so if anybody wants to find out that, then go and find that. The loudest spot caller.
Loudest spot caller. Steve Kern could be. Yeah, Steve Kern.
How would that sort of manifest in itself? Would he just be across the ring yelling, or?
Yeah, he'd be across the ring talking to you. Like he's reading the football results. Cincinnati 16, New England 12. Yeah.
Duck the clothesline.
Yeah.
I've got a few more then. The weirdest, most off-the-wall person you ever met in the business. Just completely left field.
The Metal Maniac. I worked a show one time when I was working in Japan. I came and worked a show. This was years ago for Tony Rumble, who ran great shows in the Northeast. And his cousin ran a huge show in Connecticut. They drew about 5,000 people. Well, his cousin paid us by checks that day. It was a day show. And we're all going to the bank. And here comes the Metal Maniac in the bank. No shirt on. He's got his tights on, boots on, and his face completely painted again, and goes up to get his check cashed. They're lucky they didn't shoot him.
Did he get his money?
Yeah, he got his money.
My goodness me. Best and worst celebrities you ever worked with through wrestling?
The Kevin Green, the late great Kevin Green, was a wonderful human being. And then it wasn't that he was such a bad guy, but he was off the wall with Dennis Rodman.
With Dennis Rodman, because I think he came in maybe for 3 different stints. Was he any easier or harder to work with across those 3 years?
Well, it wasn't that he was hard. It was hard to find him. He had his own trailer sometimes. I mean, it was, and then he was always late, and it was time for him to go on. You couldn't find him. It wasn't that he was abrasive or anything. It was just that he was very difficult to find.
Well, the Bulls found him difficult to find once or twice as well, I believe.
Yeah. Do you remember when he took off from a pregame and practice and was wrestling?
Yeah,
and,
that was in the playoffs, wasn't it? In '98.
Yeah. And Phil said, "Well, he's down wrestling today at Nitro." I couldn't believe it.
I've seen The Last Dance, so I know that one. Just because we're talking about Dennis Rodman, I'm sure Eric Bischoff has said a story where he went into his trailer one day and it was like Caligula, the film.
Oh,
Any personal stories of hanging around Rodman and what he used to get up to?
well, I think Eric and I may have been in the same trailer. It was at Sturgis. Eric said it was at Sturgis.
I don't know if he said Sturgis. He just said he walked in one day. I was like, oh my God.
It was the same. I walked in, there was naked women everywhere. He had, whatever he was drinking, he had all kinds of bottles of alcohol. He was halfway into partying, and I walked in. I said, "Oh, I'll give somebody else that job." Went out, and yeah, I mean, Dennis goes to a different beat.
Mm, definitely. I hesitate to say that I know what the answer is going to be, but the most legitimate tough badass.
Bang.
Mm-hmm. Any personal stories, or because I've heard a lot of third-hand ones?
Yep. I got one. I got a few, but I got one that stands out. We're in Houma, Louisiana. Everybody looks like they're related in the audience. The Fackel and Fickle family. We come out of Houma. Me, Ming, Arn, and Barbarian. Well, in Louisiana, they used to have some strange laws where you couldn't buy beer unless you went into a bar. So we're driving down, heading back to New Orleans, and there's a little roadside bar. I pull in. I said, I'll get the beer. I pull in. Some guy said, I got to take a leak. And I go in and I'm waiting. It's packed. I'm trying to get the girl to take my money and get the beer. All of a sudden, I look to my left, there's Ming. And he's drinking triple Jack Daniels. I said, oh, God, I got to get out of here. All of a sudden, I look again, and he's at the pool table and puts money up and says, I play a winner. Well, somebody said a derogatory statement to him. And a guy came up behind him and hit him with a pool cue, and it shattered. He turned around and he goozled the guy. That was the first time I ever saw. I didn't know it was real. When he decided to drop the guy, he bit through the guy's shirt on his back and took a piece of flesh out and spit it on the floor. We got out of there, jumped in the car, and I drove down, and they have these sugarcane fields in Louisiana. I pulled off and drove as far as I could, turned the car around, facing the road we were on. 5 minutes later, cop cars going by. We waited about an hour and a half, and I drove like 150 miles out of my way to get back to New Orleans. It was like, to this day, it looked like a movie. It looked like a movie stuff. I mean, he's a cannibal. I mean, you've heard all the stories. The Funk, what was his Jimmy Jack Funk? The eye. And, I mean, I think I'd rather go in with a tiger than Ming.
And this sort of leads into the very last question I'm going to ask you. And in this little round here, most memorable backstage fight.
Most memorable backstage fight. Buzz Sawyer and Chick Donovan. Boy, Buzz killed him. Oh, it was brutal. I had to pull Buzz off. I mean, I came up the stairs and it was in Augusta. And they had been having words for a couple of days. And all of a sudden, I get there and I see Buzz suplex him, belly to back suplex, and he on him and he pound him. I grabbed them, and I think Tommy Rich grabbed them, Brad Armstrong grabbed them. Chick was worse for wear, that's for sure.
Did the talking dog not come to Chick's aid?
Yeah. Oh, God, the talking dog. God. I saw him at a convention. He still looks fabulous, dressed in his Elvis suits. He looks great.
Yeah, he still got the Ric Flair hair thing going on.
Yeah.
Good for him. Good for him. Okay, everybody, we're back from the break, and instead of talking about WCW, I just asked Kevin, had he ever wrestled Adrian Street, and the answer was?
Yes, I did. Adrian was fabulous. Fabulous. I hear he's back in England.
Yeah, he's back in Wales, yeah.
Oh, great, great. I did a thing with him and Dusty, and I stabbed Dusty and the Miss Linda with the spike. But the greatest high spot I ever saw in my life was in Tampa Armory. It was Barry Windham and Moolah against Adrian Street and Miss Linda. So the match is going on, and Adrian and Barry have a double knockout, but Barry falls into the ropes and gets tied up in the ropes. Adrian gets up, sees Barry, gets some lipstick out, redoes his lips, puts them out like Kardashians about their lips, charges to kiss Barry. Barry ducks, Moolah got her face in front. Adrian kisses Moolah, and he starts gagging around the ring like he said stuck his face in the cow shit. It was the greatest high spot I ever saw in my life. Adrian was such a great performer, way ahead of his time, and a double tough bastard, man. I mean, I used to have dinners with Adrian. He's a great cook, too. Great cook. He's an all-around cowboy, Adrian. Makes soldiers, makes clothes, paints, sings, writes books. Really, a really super guy.
You wouldn't think a Renaissance man, would you, from him? But, I mean, he's a very talented man.
Very talented. And from where his background, the coal mines. And I spent a lot of great time with Adrian. Great guy.
Whenever Adrian's name comes up when we talk to Dutch Mantel on the other podcast, Storytime with Dutch Mantel, and he always brings up that he loves the song that Adrian did, was There's Something Strange About a Cowboy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I loved every one of Adrian's songs. Let me ask you, James, do you think that gimmick could you get away with that gimmick in today's social environment?
I think you only could if the wrestler playing that character was gay in real life, or else you'd be culturally appropriating just something stupid like that, the usual wokeism. But then could you portray the wrestlers being repulsed by him when he tries to kiss them?
Yeah. It's a catch-22.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But I'm glad he had his run. He deserved it. Very talented man. And she's a sweetheart. She really is. Linda was a sweetheart.
I'll make sure that they get this clip as well, because I know they always
great.
Whenever I post something about Adrian or someone talking about Adrian, he always posts it on his Facebook and stuff, so I'll make sure he gets it. For now, we're going to go back to WCW, and this is maybe my favourite question, isn't it about time that you and Eric Bischoff and Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan all band together and finally admit that the NWO was Greg Garnia's idea?
Yeah, it was. I haven't heard that one. As Greg said that he did it.
I believe Greg is like Forrest Gump in his own mind sometimes, that he seems to be everywhere important and he comes up with everything.
Did he say he created the NWO?
I don't have a quote or anything, but I think he's got some claim to legitimacy.
Yeah.
In I mean, of the legitimate people who did sort of like form the NWO, I mean, there's Eric, of course, there's New Japan, where the original storyline was seen. Hall and Nash made it their own. Larry Zbyszko had a hand in it. I mean, percentage-wise, who deserves the most credit, maybe in like ascending or descending order of making the NWO what it was?
Eric, because he brought the idea over, but Nash and Hall, because they brought the pizzazz over. They made you believe that they were invading. I don't think, first of all, Nash and Hall are like Abbott and Costello, Laurel and Hardy, Lewis and Martin. You can't separate them. Kevin is, a very, very Renaissance man. We're talking about Renaissance man. He can talk about wine. He can talk about football. He's a big sports fan. He knows art. But Eric and those guys deserve 90% of it, I
think. Not to give you, well, I'm going to afford you the chance to blow smoke up your own backside in a sense. But what did you bring to the NWO presentation that no one else did?
I think it was that I understood that this was right from the beginning when Nash and Hall, when Hall first came, then Kevin came. Was it the second week or third week? Wasn't there a week down?
Yeah, I think Scott Hall, week 2, talking about, and then week 3, he had a big surprise, something like that.
When I saw what they brought, and I said, boy, I'm going to get a lot of heat with these baby faces because this is never going to come again. And I'm going to get the napalm, and I'm going to get lighter fluid, I'm going to gasoline, and I'm going to gas this. And they're going to destroy the company until the baby faces make the comeback. It's just like it. Wrestling is the epitome of any good story. The babyface has to get beat up until the end. And then when Hogan went to turn heel, the people really bought who was the WWF against WCW. But my main thing was to keep the heat on them and create it. Nash did something that I did on an interview with Steve Austin, and I never really thought of it that way, but he was right. Like, I would have a thing where one night I had the dungeon against the Horsemen in a 4-man tag, so there was 8 of us. They went over us, and when they left the ring, we were kind of hurt physically, supposedly. And they came down and wailed us, leave us laying. And then the Horsemen returned to save us. So people were saying, why would they do this? You know what I mean? And then the infamous one in Orlando, that was the only time I ever scripted anything. I scripted that whole thing where Nash spearing Ray against the trailer. People if you remember, Jimmy Hart ran down, separated the match, and said they were invading. People actually were calling in to Disney and saying, send the police, send the police. The police showed up. And then the Randy Savage jumping on. People actually bought that, or at least suspended their disbelief for that moment in time. And I think keeping the heat on those guys was instrumental because they had come in and there was a little bit of animosity to them because they were getting pushed and they were the opposition. And it took a lot of politicking for me on the baby faces to have them, or at least for me to appeal to their higher judgment that we got to do this because you got to make a comeback.
Absolutely. Something I'll have a question to follow on that, but I've got to ask this: is I think it's fairly well known that obviously Hulk Hogan was the first choice to be the third man in the NWO. Sting was the second choice. Was there a third choice, or was there maybe a list of Plan C, D, etc.?
James, that's the most fictitious story of all times.
Really?
There was no, and I've heard this from even the guys that were involved. There was no Plan B. Let me tell you the story. I lived a mile from the Ocean Center on the ocean, Daytona Beach, Atlantic Boulevard. I made Hogan come to my house, sleep in my house the night before the event. He brought his publicist, his agent, Peter. I can't remember his last name. I had a 4-bedroom house. I made that bastard sleep on the couch. I gave Hogan a bedroom. When the show came on, I waited till the television program was on. The first match was in the ring. I got in Hogan's limo. We went to there. I don't know what I would have done if Hogan backed out.
Oh, right. So there was, I mean, obviously the story with Sting is so widely out there, but even I believe that one.
But here's the thing. If it was Sting, it didn't make any sense because it was the WWF. I don't think it could have ever worked. Sting would have made it work. I shouldn't say that. But it wouldn't have been us against them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of, and that actually sort of brings it in as well, is I don't know if you agree, but it's sort of bandied around that maybe the first mistake with the NWO was then the NWO membership drive. And then the group ends up getting watered down somewhat. I mean, off the top of my head, IRS, Big Boss Man, Buff Bagwell, and then the group swells from a few to a huge sort of roster of people within a few months. Is that how you look at it as well, or did the NWO always have to be that big?
No, it should have been Nash, Hall, Hogan. And then if we had a creative sit-down meeting, somehow, because somehow we get Scott Steiner over there because of the known problems he had with The Office, the known problems he had with Ric Flair, right? Mm-hmm. It was not unknown, where he cut those promos with Rick out of no reason. If we came up with a storyline where he defected, and now maybe one more, and it might have been Buff, because Buff and X-Pac, I just forgot about him. X-Pac was very instrumental in that. He's the only guy, that's been in 2 factions that's in the Hall of Fame. He's the missing link. He was great. He worked with them terrifically. Buff could have went over there with a great storyline, and I always thought if we did it right, him and X-Pac could be like feuding, have a little animosity there, give him a little different view on the NWO, Sorry, the NWO for life. Well, it's for life, but there's still human animosity with people. I don't think it should have went more than, the original 4 and 2 more. That was it. Mm-hmm. Because everybody knew the other guys were getting paid by WCW. They didn't stop your checks.
So you wouldn't have had Virgil in?
No, I don't think I would have had Virgil.
Right then, there's something else about the NWO, and this is, you tell me if it's true or not. It was supposed to be Davey Boy Smith as maybe the 4th member. Does that ring true, or is that just a rumor given out throughout the years?
I don't think it was a non-truth. What I think it was they were talking about him, but like, what would we do Well, maybe Davey Boy would fit in here. It was that kind of conversation. And maybe when they were having the contract negotiations with Davey Boy, it might have been Davey Boy were thinking about that, but nothing was written in stone at that time.
Do you remember any other WWF contracted talent who were almost going to come to the WCW and then potentially join to the NWO that you thought you could get your hooks in and put in the group?
I thought at one time that Shawn Michaels, because he was so close to, he was part of the clique with Nash, Hall, and Kidd. I thought that maybe he'd want to come with his friends. Now, he would have fit perfectly. But I don't know if they even had talks with Shawn. And I often think, you know how I said Kevin's a Renaissance man?
Mm-hmm.
He's also one of the smartest guys I ever met. He might have thought if Shawn comes, that's going to decimate WWF, and maybe we'll tip the balance too much, and we won't have a place to go back to if we have to go back. Mm-hmm. That's just my opinion, and I could be wrong, but I mean, at that period of time, I think they would offer Shawn anything he wanted.
He was making, at the time in the WWF, I think he was making Sting money, which is, what, $750,000 a year?
Yeah.
But you don't know. I mean, obviously there's no, contract tampering. No one ever talks to anyone else under contract, wink. But, yeah, I don't. So you don't know if any feelers were put out to see when he'd be available?
Well, I'm sure that Nash was the negotiator for the company. And again, I go back to were they wise enough to understand, and Kevin would be, that you need competition. You need the other company to be strong because it makes you work harder. Because I've often thought about that. Why didn't, well, you see it today, AEW. All the friends come over, right? Mm-hmm. Why didn't Shawn come over? There had to be a, surely they were going to pay him $750, if not $1,750,000.
And then if he got more, then Scott Hall and Kevin Nash would get more because of favored nations and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it benefited those guys definitely if Shawn had come over.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to actually mention this now because I think there's no better time to bring it up. Is Scott Hall recently passed away, and I thought this was a good time to sort of pay tribute to the man as handsome as 10 movie stars and how special of a talent he really was.
Well, I had a special place for Scott because I knew Scott before he was in the business. He used to come to the gym where the guys work out. He came to me one time and said, how can I get the wrestling business? And I said, well, go see Dusty Rhodes at 106 North Albany one day, make an appointment. And he showed up there. And then he came to Florida. And when Florida was very down, this is when Dusty had left and taken all the talent to North Carolina. Scott stepped in as the top baby face. He kept the company afloat, that's all you could ask for. Because they had just lost Dusty, Barry, Blackjack, Mike Rotunda, Black Bart, the whole list of guys, Magnum, and he came in and kept the company afloat, and then he went to AWA, and then at the time I was living in the Bahamas, and I would fly from the Bahamas to different places that I was working. And one night I flew in, it was a Thursday night, because I was going to work in Florida on Friday. And I went to the Marriott, and I walk in, and Scott's in the lobby. And I bump into Scott, and I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "I'm here for a meeting with Pat Patterson and Vince tomorrow." He said, "I don't care what I do. I just need to feed my family." So I was there when he gave the pitch to McMahon and Patterson, and neither one of them had seen the movie. So Scott was off and running. One of the smoothest workers of all times, because what's so funny about James, he was a good worker when he was a babyface, but he wasn't as smooth as he turned out to be. And he really applied himself to learn his craft, and he did it really well. And like you mentioned, he looked like Tarzan to me. If I was ever going to make a Tarzan movie, Scott would have been in the role.
With Scott, in his early few years, I mean, he wrestled in America and Germany and goodness knows where else. I get the feeling in the early days he was just another big guy prodding alligators in those vignettes that he did that time, and he was just like a sort of like no real charisma, and then all of a sudden he went from no charisma to one of the most charismatic people in the business. Where did he find that inner sort of personality?
I think some people, you have it and you suppress it, because when you get in the business, sometimes you're intimidated to show that. But I think what happened to Scott was when he told me that he had to get a job to pay his family, he said, "The hell with it, I'm throwing the ball against the wall and I'm going to take it." And I think that's where he got it. It was necessary for him.
And I know we talked about Kevin Nash and Adrian Street as Renaissance men, but Scott Hall was also a creative mind in a sense as well. I know, and a lot of his creative ideas came from films. So we've got Scarface, we've got The Crow with Sting. Was there anything else that Scott came up with for other people?
I'm sure he did, but Scott wasn't one to go around and brag about stuff. Even though he was braggadocious in his character, but Scott had a wrestling mind, and I hate to be a homer, but most of the guys that came from Florida or started in Florida had very good wrestling minds because of what they saw presented to them on TV.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We'll move off the NWO and Scott and the Outsiders for a little bit. And something else that Eric Bischoff has said before is that the Honky Tonk Man was his favourite ever firing that he did from WCW. And as a booker, as someone who had to deal with some of these guys who may be difficult to deal with, who were you glad to see the back of when they finally left WCW for good?
Heard, for sure. But a wrestler, that thing with Honky has always puzzled me. I mean, I don't know what happened there, because it wasn't like he never did a job in his life. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
And I can understand how Eric says that, because Eric was going to bend over and help him. And it was like, if you do this for me, I know we're cool. Well, one job isn't going to kill your career. And he was going to win the next night again, remember? And I just don't know what happened there. And I can understand Eric's point of view. To me, I try to understand people because we're all different. Everybody has, in the wrestling business, a bit of paranoia, and they all think everybody's out to get them. And maybe it has some truth to it. But when I see a guy leave and he has no place to go, I really worry, because, I was going to protect his family.
Absolutely. Speaking of people going, I've heard your name come up in this as well as Terry Taylor's. And is there any truth to the rumor that there was going to be like a big ECW invasion of WCW? And was it Todd Gordon who was meant to be the supposed mole in the back who was negotiating contracts with WCW?
Meaning a shoot invasion or a real invasion?
No, like a storyline invasion.
Oh,
they were gonna book like everybody to come over and then be a ECW faction.
No, because what was going on was I started Paul Heyman in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And when guys would call and they would call Eric would come to me and say, hey, what do you think about this guy? They're all were talented. I said, it'd be a perfect deal. He said, I'm going to bring them in. And I'd call Paul and say, they're going to bring them whether you like it or not. I'll keep them at bay for 2 months. You got 8 weeks to figure this other thing out. Now, the ECW invasion, that might have been Terry's idea. I might not have been there then. I don't think it could have worked, because it would have worked if they had kept running as ECW also. And Todd would have been a great mole. There was a lot of good things that could have come out of that, but I don't think Eric was going to allow ECW to invade WCW unless WCW decimated them.
Yeah. I've got one more sort of like fairly heavy question, and then we will move on to, I'm hoping, more lighter fare anyway. And this is something I really don't know the answer to. In an interview a few years ago, Kevin Nash said that he butted heads with you over creative direction. Now, this is something March 31st, 1997, I've got the date as. And I believe that Nash at the time had presumed or said the word that you were sabotaging him in some way, and I don't know why, I don't know how, I don't know any of the story, other than you had a butting of heads creatively, and then we removed as booker for a while.
Yeah, the thing was, Kevin's a strong mental guy. He's very smart. He's very smart. I mean, I was his assistant, he was my assistant. But at this period of time, they were also having problems with Eric. So he was very on edge. And I started, at that time, we had fed them for a long time. I started to say they needed to have a crack. You know, WCW needed to get a win in the win column. And they didn't think I was right. I don't know if I was, because it never happened. But Kevin and I butted heads that time, but we're dearest friends. I just heard from him last night.
Do you, which of Master Blaster, Oz, or Vinny Vegas was your favorite?
Vinny Vegas was my favorite.
Why Vinny?
Because Kevin is so cool sometimes. I could see Kevin be in another lifetime being a lounge singer dressed as Vinny. You know, he's like, what's the guy? Andy Kaufman's
Bob Zamuda.
Alias.
Oh, no, not Bob Zamuda. Tony Clifton.
Yeah, Tony Clifton. Kevin could have been Tony Clifton's alternate, ego. Kevin is a funny guy, and to me, I look at when you said that about Vinny Vegas, I can see it in my mind's eye perfectly. I just thought Kevin would have been a great lounge singer. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's like wah 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 wah. And then
Yeah.
I love in Man on the Moon when Tony Clifton just before Tony Clifton walks on, and announcer goes, "Please, everybody in the audience, could you please extinguish your cigarettes? It's very very bad for Tony Clifton's voice, and please, he will not come on until everybody puts." And then he walks on. Everyone's done it, and then he walks on, chokes on the biggest cigar he could find.
Yeah.
It's great. That movie's got its critics, man, but I really like it.
I do too. I thought he played that role. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, James. After he played that role, did he ever do anything come close to being successful?
Truman Show, but I don't know if that was the year before. Eternal
So I
Sunshine
think
of
the
the
Truman Show was
Spotless
the year before.
Mind. Eternal Sunshine was a pretty big film. That was in the mid 2000s. I suppose you can count Sonic. I mean, he's Dr. Robotnik in Sonic. They're pretty big, but apart from that, not too much.
Yeah.
There you go. That's Jim Carrey news for you there.
Yeah, but he played an incredible role, I thought, as Andy Kaufman. I mean, supposedly he stayed in character the whole time.
Yes, I can imagine that would be annoying. I mean, Jerry Lawler once said, because he was on the set obviously for quite a few weeks, and Jim Carrey was doing what he thought Andy Kaufman would be in real life. And Jerry was like, Andy Kaufman was the meekest, nicest person in the world, so whereas Jim was just causing problems on set, supposedly, constantly.
Yeah.
I will move on then from the Man on the Moon for some reason. And where am I going to go to? Now, we said we mentioned this a little bit as well, and your feud with Chris Benoit ends up in the men's bathroom in the backstage brawl. Was it match of the year or feud of the year there?
I think it was match of the year or feud of the year, but I think it was match of the year.
Do you remember like if there was any clearance to use the bathroom beforehand, or were you just rolling around in piss?
No. Nobody knew what we were doing that. He was in the ring and I came out and I nodded my head, come on, get me. And we started right away up into the bathroom. And I mean, we chased people out of the bathroom. And it was very, very. We could have made it. There could have been a couple of spots where it could have become comical. It was very hard to keep it completely straight. You know what I mean? There was a time where he was going to put my head in the toilet, and we almost went and did it. And I said, "Oh, that was too much." And then there was another one where I picked up the concession stand, this thing of mustard, and a big gallon of whatever it was of mustard was going to hit it with. And I said, "Nah, can't do that. That's going to take away the seriousness of it." So it was a very intense match.
Yeah, I remember seeing it. I remember seeing it years after the fact, and it still holds up. It's still a great, like, proper hardcore match and everything. Just speaking from a television production point of view, how much planning do you need, and how much, basically, how much planning do you need to have for going in the backstage and doing all these things in all these different areas of the arena and still getting it broadcast and looking proper?
You have to go to the production people and get them comfortable and get them to be excited as you are to do this, because it's a lot of work for them to set up. And I had a very good rapport with them, and I was lucky to have that rapport. And they said, "Oh, sure, we'll do it." But it's very difficult, and a lot of things can go wrong.
So you've got two wrestlers, one referee on camera. How many people are behind the camera trying to capture this all?
Well, I would say they had 6 cameras, if I can remember well, in different locations. In case we went, like when we went to the bathroom, we took a left. We could have taken a right and gone to the concession stand first. So they had to be placed there. There was cameras around the ring. There was cameras on the entranceway because we ended up fighting down there too. So, I mean, they did a hell of a job to be able to capture it all.
Yeah, I was going to ask actually as well, is did you have like a time, like you've got to be here for 2 minutes 30 before we move on to the next area,
No, because they were set up, because they were very good at their job. They were set up to click over. I don't know technically how they did it back then, but they could switch instantaneously to another camera and not miss anything. So it was, hey, they did their role perfectly.
I think spawning from this storyline with Benoit, we go to Jacqueline. Jacqueline Moore becomes your valet for a short while. Why was it such a short while that Jackie was with you?
Because I was getting ready to wind down and just go to the office. But what I wanted to do, if you can remember some of the interviews, I'd say, she can beat any man in the world but me, or she's the tougher than any man except me. I was going to put her over.
Mm.
I wanted to put her over in a match. First of all, she's a great athlete. I was leaving to go to the office. What better way to give her a boost?
With intergender matches, would that have been a problem for Turner, essentially? Would they have had a real problem with a man hitting a woman on screen and, you know, having a proper match?
Back in the day, no, because they had a few matches in house shows with guys versus girls. Today, here's something that I do not understand. Haven't they had a few of them on TV now, Impact, where they had...
Tessa Blanchard was the champion in Impact a few years ago.
Yeah. They didn't get heat over that?
I don't think so, apart from the fact that it was stupid to have Tessa be the men's world champion.
Right, but they didn't get heat about it. And that's what I wonder. You know, we were in wrestling's in a very strange world. Even though they know it's choreographed, they get a heat over different things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if today you could do that. You know, I don't know. And the style her and I would have had in that match, I certainly don't think you could have get away with it. I could have hanged with the tree of wall and gave them a running knee. I don't think. Do you?
I don't think so, no. I think it'd have to be like chain wrestling somehow.
Yeah.
With no strikes. How hard did you have to convince Disco Inferno to wrestle and get beaten by Jackie?
Well, I think one of the things was his contract is coming to a close, if I remember well. And Eric and him hadn't sat down to talk about it and where it was going. And now we're asking him to do a job for Jackie. It looks like he's getting out the door and not coming back. So it would be very difficult. But Disco's a very talented guy. And he came back stronger. So it was okay for him.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move on from Jackie. And something that I want to bring up is, as a young fan watching wrestling in something like April 1999, I loved the old Nitro sets. You have the scaffolding and all the, what looked like to me at the time, Christmas lights going on around, and I loved the huge WCW logos. And then one day someone gets it in their head that they watch an old episode of Star Trek and they want to make a logo based off the Starship Enterprise, and they totally change the production of the show. Do you remember why that was? Because I remember really hating that set change.
I did too. To me, it'd be like changing the Yankees logo. It was, I'm a believer, if it's not broke, don't try to fix it. And here's the thing about corporate world. Somebody knows somebody that's a designer that's going to have a no bid contract and get a big payday to come up with some bullshit, and you're going to get a kickback.
Simple as that then, is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. How many wrestlers slipped over the new design on the ramp?
Everybody hated it. Everybody hated it. It took our identity away. Don't you think so? I mean, as a kid, you know, when that came on, you got excited. Now you're looking at something you don't like. I don't think they did any survey to show anybody that.
I'm a big believer. I mean, obviously, the first bite is with the eye, and I'm a big believer that the rings in WCW were always darker. They always had black ropes, and it's sort of and a lot of the wrestlers wore black as well. It was quite a mono, very few colors really, and the set it made it colourful and sort of took it the other way, if you know what I mean. But when the Starship Enterprise logo came out, everything was black and grey. And I remember that being really unappealing to me as a viewer, as a kid.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point. I just kind of, I've been in a piss trance all these years or something, but I saw some ropes the other day. They were red and white. And I said, wow. I mean, it brings some to life. And now that you mentioned it, black ropes, black tights, the logos, it was like a downer. It was like you're putting you to sleep to start with. There was nothing. I mean, the production value at that period, maybe they were searching for something to be hip, and it certainly wasn't.
I'm going to ask you a few more questions about WCW, and then we will move on to the firing line once again, where I'll just ask you a bunch of random names for wrestlers, and then I will thank you so much for your time once again. But I'm trying to look through the script on what I'm going to ask you, and it is going to be working the boys. When was it Brian Pillman incident? Was that the first time that the boys were working the boys for no one's benefit, but not the audience's benefit, certainly?
Yeah, and that was the only thing that I personally might have regretted, but it was Pillman's shtick. It was his show. And if he didn't have people thinking he was losing his mind, I don't think he would have got over quite as big as he did. The one that set it off, James, and see if you agree with me, is when he grabbed Bobby and Bobby said, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Yeah.
I mean, that, if you're sitting at home and you hear Bobby Heenan completely out of character say that, you think Brian's out of his mind. Now, if everybody knew that, right? If everybody knew that Brian was working, Bobby's reaction would have been completely different. He wouldn't have said, "What the fuck are you doing?" And Bobby would have tried to put a little bit of a happy slant on it, or a cute comeback. So I understand why Pillman was so enraged to do that, because in Brian's head, he had put a lot in. And the other thing is, that character in Brian started to merge. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Brian was so deep into that character, it started to merge as him. And he wanted Sting money, and he had tried to be the best work he possibly could and didn't get it. So he was going to get it the way he wanted to get it. And he thought he had to work the guys and everybody else.
Do you remember any other examples where, so one off the top of my head, DDP and Buff Bagwell stage a fight in catering or scuffle in catering or something like that, but do you remember any other ones where two people were trying to convince everybody else in the back that they really hated each other?
No, I don't. And I didn't know why Paige would have done that, because Paige was so well liked and Buff was well liked too. So it needed a special character. Pillman was the only guy that I could see that could do that.
Yeah.
Because everybody did think Brian was nuts.
I asked you a version of this in the last interview that we did yesterday, and I'm going to ask you the same question again, in a sense, of the worst characters of the last days of WCW. So I've named some: that 70s guy, the Fat Chick Thriller, Misfits in Action, Oklahoma, Kiss Demon, Seven, Judy Bagwell, David Arquette in general. Could any of those have been salvaged in some way to make them a money draw?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. And some of them were. The Oklahoma, that was the worst thing ever on television. Making fun of a guy's disability. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I mean, and a guy that's a Hall of Famer. What were they thinking? And then, I have a theory, if you want to hear it.
Please.
I think they were trying to produce a sitcom called Wrestling Between the Ropes or whatever. That period was not a period of wrestling. That was a sitcom. I think they were trying to show that and take clips out of that and bring it to a studio and say, oh, we'd like to do a sitcom about wrestling. You can't draw money with that. Funny doesn't draw money.
Mm-hmm.
Even to this day, we'll go to the WWF. You have Roman Reigns, you have Brock, you have the Scottish kid,
Drew McIntyre.
Yeah, and Seth. What do they have in common? They're solid. They're not doing the gobbly-goobler. It just doesn't work. And I don't, I may be way off on that, but why would you do anything like those things unless it was a skit? Do you think I'm way off on that?
Well, I was going to ask, do you think that Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara genuinely thought what they were doing was good?
I like Ed personally. I know Vince. I've got along with him. But where did Ed come from? Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Mm-hmm.
Get it in.
What's I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say with Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara, and now I can't think of what it was I was going to ask. So I've just interrupted you, and now we've both lost our train of thought. Sorry about that. He was from Duckman, wasn't he, as well, or something?
Yeah.
Ed Ferrara.
Yeah. It wasn't Gone with the Wind he was from.
Yes, the writer of Schindler's List is now with WCW.
Yeah.
Did they have any strengths, genuinely, Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara, as far as what could they have brought to wrestling under the right circumstances? Because they did, or Vince certainly did, Russo had a lot of success with WWF, as well as failures that were brushed over because it was doing so well.
I think Vince Russo was very intelligent. He was very good at seeing talent. But when I first started, Eddie used to say, Kevin, you're good, but you paid off the easel too often. If he had a Vince to go through that could sort what was very, very good to some ideas that weren't as good, didn't apply. I think he would have been hugely successful.
And it's the prerequisite question for anything that revolves around WCW is the shutdown of WCW, and a lot of things are blamed for the demise of WCW. Egos, the AOL Time Warner merger, Jamie Kellner, who ultimately pulled the plug, guaranteed contracts, that kind of thing. What was ultimately the problem with WCW that really brought it down, if you can nail it to one thing?
When they AOL bought it, right?
Yeah.
They didn't want it. And I'll tell you what they did. I used to book the TVs a month in advance. Janie Ingalls was my secretary. I would give Janie she was brilliant. I'd give Janie the shows, and she would go over the shows, and she would see who I was bringing, and then she'd come to me and say, what if this guy gets hurt? What if that guy gets hurt? And I'd say, okay, bring this guy, this guy, this guy. So I have 4 backups. She would go, give it to the travel company. We in-house travel. They would have the tickets. They would have the hotels, the rental cars, all ready for the guys. When AOL got there, they told me, you bring everybody to TV. I'd have, we'll say, I had 30 guys going to be on the show. 100 guys would show up. They would walk in and say, are we on the show? No. Can we go home? Absolutely. I had guys flying in on first-class tickets with a hotel room at a Marriott, a rental car, and most of them were the top of the line, a Lincoln or a Cadillac, that didn't rent the rental car. They jumped in because they didn't want to waste the time. They jumped in a cab and went to the building and then took the cab back. How much money was wasted? They wasted so much money. Going back to what you said, the change in the logo. Wrestling has its ups and downs. They could have got through with it, but they cut their own throat because they wanted it to fail. I mean, you don't, to me, I mean, I may be wrong, but do you bring 100 people or 70 people when you only need 25? And you're paying flights from Atlanta, we'll say the guys live in Atlanta to Phoenix, Arizona, in hotels and cars, and then send them back that next flight back. Just didn't make sense to me.
No.
I think they had an idea how to get rid of it. They sped it up as quick as they could.
Absolutely. I'm going to now go to the main event, as it were, firing line. All WCW guys, same thing as we did yesterday. I'm just going to give you some names. You tell me what you think of them. But before we do, I want to bring up one thing, and this is just my personal opinion. So when I was watching as a kid, I liked WCW until several things happened. Bret Hart was wasted. Goldberg was beaten. Ric Flair was... When he was in the crazy Ric Flair thing and feuding with Eric Bischoff, that was great. And then it went nowhere. And then by early 1999, you just had all these guys that I used to care about just a few months before. And I find that amazing, just like that. I find that amazing how you can just sort of just ruin someone's enjoyment of like some of your favourite wrestlers so quickly. I'm not saying you. But
no, I understand.
I said WCW as a whole, but when I said you, it sounded like you did that.
Right. So what do I think what happened?
Well, with those 3 guys, Bret, Goldberg, Flair, surely they were the people to take it for the next few years at least and keep on top.
Okay. How well did Bret get along with Hogan?
Not that well.
You're coming into a place where a guy got creative control.
Mm.
He doesn't like you.
How did that? How did Hogan deal with that? Was it always backstabbing and not booking him for certain shows? How would he deal with Bret to keep him down?
All you have to do is say, that doesn't work for me, brother. Let's do this with him.
Broke the mustache.
Yeah. Goldberg. The night, I wasn't booking them when they beat him. The night they beat Goldberg, we had 40,000 people, approximately 40,000 people in the Georgia Dome. Mm. I took them out. I said, take a look at this. And you're going to beat them? They told me the finish. And I said, please, this is the finish you should do. He gets Kevin. They have a hell of a match. He bumps Kevin. Kevin goes to the corner. Bill goes to the tackle. Kevin sidestep. Bill shoots through. Hits his noggin, which he later did. Hits his noggin on the metal post. Bounces back. Kevin does something and gives him a jackhammer. 1, 2, 3. Have him lose like he won. Ali lost. You can't go on forever. But Ali didn't have people cattle prodding him, handcuffing him, sticking toothpicks in his eyes. I mean, sometimes the quickest way is a straight line to get something done.
Do you remember the time when someone spray painted his head and he lost his mind in the middle of the ring?
No, I don't remember that.
He was quite upset. I believe some of his friends, like from the Atlanta Falcons, were backstage, and he had to take a load of photos with him with a spray-painted head.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, he got ripped pretty good sometimes. Yeah.
Righto. We'll do the firing line then. We've got about 10 minutes, and I'll carry on till Chris tells me to go away. And I'm going to give you some names, all from WCW, and one person near and dear to my heart, as you might imagine, Loch Ness.
You know, I had taken a lot of heat about him, right? The time I had him on TV in that main event on a Saturday night, we did a 4-2. People like to see oddities, and he had been a big draw. Funny, this is I should have told you this when we first started. I was a big fan of the English wrestlers because Steve Clements, do you know the name?
No, I don't know.
His dad was the owner of Joint Promotions. His real name, you can look it up, but his dad come over, and I was going to go to England and work. Steve Beresford, maybe? Does that sound right?
I'm just having a look now, in fact. Joint Promotions. Just
Ted Beresford.
Ted Beresford, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I knew the Loch Ness. I knew these guys. I used to get the English magazines sent to me. And I was a big fan. I would find some videos on them and watch them. I mean, Jackie Paulo, Mick McManus, Rocco. There was some great, Rollerball Rocco.
Yeah.
Some great performers over there. And then he was there, and I thought, wow, big guys have always been an attraction in the United States. Haystack Calhoun, Andre the Giant, Sky High Lee. So I took a lot of heat of that, but he drew 4-2. So that's a great number.
Absolutely. Next one.
And he worked very hard. He was a nice man.
Next one is, and someone's asked me this as well, Lord Stephen Regal, but someone asks if you were the agent for the Regal Goldberg match.
No. I was booking that. I think Mike Graham might have been the agent. Now, I don't think that Regal went out of his way, what a lot of people do, think that to bury Bill. I actually think it was supposed to be a competitive match, but I don't think that Bill, it was our fault for booking that, and mine in particular. Bill wasn't ready to be in the ring with a performer like Regal. So the mistake falls on the coaching staff. Regal, who all of us have an ego, wasn't going to go out there because he spent a lot of time training to be a pro wrestler. He had his heart and soul into it. I mean, he had done the Inoki match. Remember that one?
Mm.
Did he do the wrong thing? Absolutely not. Could he have cut the match shorter when he saw the thing wasn't going well as it should have, well, he was given the time to go. And I don't blame Regal at all. I blame us for putting Bill in there with Regal. And it was just all our fault. It had nothing to do with Regal.
No, absolutely. I've got some more names for you. We'll do it this bit more quick style. Rick Rude.
Greatest body in the business, one of the toughest guys and strongest guys I ever saw.
Larry Sabisco.
In Larry Land, wonderful guy.
You ever play golf with him?
No, I don't golf.
Oh, fair enough then. Does he bore you to death with golf stories, even though he knows you don't play golf?
Yeah, of course.
Steve McMichael. Bless Steve, he's not doing well.
Oh, one of the nicest guys. We got along famously. I love Steve. I'm so sorry. He's a wonderful human being. Enjoyed life. Just super. God bless him.
Eric Watts.
I like Eric very much. Unfortunately, I think his last name held him back and gave him heat. If his name was Schmidt, I think he would have been very good in this business for a long time.
Medusa.
You know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What?
I said no.
I was
Sorry,
going to say
Eric Watts.
the sins of the father fall upon the son. You know.
Yeah. I think he was. Is it fair to say that he could have, if with given seasoning, he would have been very good, but he wasn't given time?
Absolutely. But you know, father pushes the son, and the kid's not ready, and then the heat by being a Watts wasn't fair to Eric.
Yeah. Medusa.
Wonderful at her job. Wonderful. You know, didn't she go to Japan for quite a while? Lived in the dojo. She does monster trucks to this day. I mean, very interesting.
Very interesting. Renegade.
Put in a bad position. Put in a horrible position.
You beat him, and then Jimmy Hart called him plain old Rick. Was that just your way of just getting rid of the Renegade thing once and for all?
Yeah, but that was not the way to do it.
No. Okay. Next one, Teddy Long.
Oh, one of my favorites. I made him the evil manager. I made him my friend. I made him a manager. I just think he's wonderful.
Johnny.
One of the great.
Sorry, Karen. With the great.
One of the great managers of all times.
Johnny B. Bad.
Saddled with a horrible gimmick. You know, that the life expectancy of that gimmick can only last for a short time, I believe. If he had been Mark Merrill from the beginning, who knows what he could have done.
Maybe. Lex Luger.
I've known Lex from before he was in the business, when he was training. He was the total package. I mean, and he was hugely successful. And when I was booking, when he was Sting's partner, when he was playing that double-faced guy, the two-faced guy, I thought he did that magnificently. I thought that was the hottest he was ever.
Do you think he deserves a reappraisal of like how talented he was? Because I think at the time everyone's like, Lex Luger was shit, and it's like, well, no, he wasn't.
I think he definitely needs a reappraisal. I mean, go back and watch when he beats Hogan for the belt on TV.
Exactly.
The people go crazy. I think that sometimes people listen to stories about a guy is being arrogant and not maybe loving the business like people love the business. He tried very hard, but I'm with you. Let's go back and reappraise him. He's very, very good.
Yeah, and he did some great promos as well, especially like in the Nitro era as well. I'll move on to the next one, Billy Kidman.
Probably one of the greatest cruiserweights when he was Billy Kidman, playing Billy Kidman, not in the flock. One of the greatest cruiserweights. Him and Ray had some great matches. Him and Eddie Guerrero had some great matches.
Next one, Mark Madden.
Mark is he's a charismatic guy that can rub some people the wrong way quickly. And you know, that problem that he's had with Flair, I don't understand it because they've been friends for 35 years. Mark did a very good job. He's a real sportscaster, a sports journalist. You know, he does football and other sports in Pittsburgh. So, yeah, I think he's very good.
Vampiro.
Huge star in Mexico. Somehow, there was never the right storyline for him here. And it was, again, the coaching staff's fault. Because if he drew huge in Mexico, being a foreigner, he should have been able to draw a lot of money here.
Mm-hmm. Colonel Robert Parker.
Oh, my old tag team partner. He's one of the funniest guys in the world. At one time, when he was younger, he was a great baby face. Great baby face. Comes from the Fuller family, the Welsh family. I've worked for him and his brother on a few occasions. Very nice guys to work for. Very, very fair guys to work for.
I think you're getting abducted.
Yeah. And I had spent some wonderful times in their territories. They had Knoxville and Pensacola, so it's been good.
Van Hammer.
Van Hammer, I never really got a chance to know him very well. Very nice guy, but he was put in a position he shouldn't have had too early. He should have been seasoned.
Yeah, he had the Dynamic Dude skateboard problem, didn't he? He had a guitar that he couldn't play.
Yeah.
I'll ask you two more and then I will thank you for your time. Sid.
Sid Vicious. I can't say enough good things about Sid Vicious. I asked him to lose the belt one night, the world title. He looked at me and said, I don't think it's the right thing to do, but I'll do it for you. There was no outing, there was no storyline, there was just him manning up and doing it.
What were the circumstances that he wanted to lose him to lose the belt?
No, I beat him for the belt.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said you booked him to lose a belt.
Yeah, I booked him to lose for the belt. Yeah.
Right. But no, that's what I was asking. What were the circumstances that you wanted him to lose the belt?
I promised Benoit that he'd win the belt.
Ah.
I brought him in and said, you want a guy 5'6" to beat me? In front of Benoit. Mm-hmm. I said, height has nothing to do with it. He's a great worker. I said, I'd like you to put him over. And he said, I think it's the wrong thing to do, but because you're asking me, I'll do it. That was it.
And the very last one, 6 wonderful weeks working with the Ultimate Warrior in 1998.
See, I know Jim, the Warrior, before he was in the business. I was Mr. Tennessee when he was Mr. Georgia. And if you told me he was going to be the biggest star at one time in our business, I would have died. But, you know, you can only use his character for WCW at a certain amount of time.
Do you remember when someone would refer to him as Ultimate Warrior and everyone go, because it was copyrighted?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we made a few of those mistakes, didn't we, over the years?
I seem to remember like Mr. Ted DiBiase calling Kurt Hennig Mr. Perfect, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there was another thing with Teddy where someone called him a $1 million man. I mean, those slip-ups going to happen anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure a few more lawsuits went back and forth just to keep everyone honest.
Yeah.
Listen, you spent 2 hours with me again, 4 hours in total. I want to thank you so much for your time. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And as you know, as I told you last time, I wouldn't say it unless I meant it. And if I didn't thoroughly enjoy it, I'd just go, right, thanks, and hang up.
Thank you,
So,
James. I really enjoyed it. Let's keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there any other plugs you want to throw out there for us? Is there any way you want to be getting in contact with, or social media or anything?
Oh, you can get through with Chris, but that book, Old School Ring Squared, on Amazon by L.A. Taylor, you'll really enjoy reading it.
I will have a look into it. I will do the links. Thank you so much, Kevin, and we will catch you again next week.
Thank you, babe.